So Corey Minor from the Smart Christian channel, who I had a discussion with not too long ago, he has decided that the scholars I provided to him, who say that his inferences that make or break his case for once saved, always saved, are just not enough. He wants more scholars. Then, of course, once he dismisses those, he'll want further scholars still yet. In fact, the ones that he provides are most sufficient for Corey. But let's talk about this. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe. And I know a lot of people are wanting a live debate review of the discussion that I had with Corey. Well, once I get time, we'll get around to that. But for now, I'm just putting out these shorter videos. So Corey Minor is the host of the Smart Christian channel, and for years has made the challenge that if you show his Greek exegesis wrong in John chapter 10, verse 28, that he thinks establishes once saved, always saved, or if you can provide one Greek scholar who says that he's wrong. But of course you provide that and he critiques it and says, nope, doesn't count. And that's the way that works. So I provided him with two of them. I had two more ready in the discussion that we had. The one where he doesn't listen very well. Corey Minor's the kind of guy who wants to do most of the talking. I mean, that's just the reality. So we're going to get a lot of mileage out of this discussion that I had with Corey Minor, and not just because of the discussion. Corey Minor has a relatively large following on YouTube, some 174,000 people. It's a pretty big reach in YouTube terms, at least I think. And so, because of the reach, that's usually one of the top reasons I pick to talk about somebody. And since I've had a discussion with him, and since he invites challenges and discussions, then we're going to get a lot of mileage out of this. So we're going to have a lot of material on this and Corey Minor going forward. But, so, for years he's made this challenge. I've met the challenge, and of course it was not enough. I didn't expect it would be. You know, he says he might stop making the challenge because it sounds arrogant. Well, actually, it's foolish. It's foolish. And it's not believable. Anytime somebody makes a claim, I'll shut down my channel. Now, that was the challenge that he would, if you met it, he would shut down his channel or give his channel over. Well, that's pretty foolish. Why would you do such a thing? Now, I want everybody to keep in mind that it's Corey Minor asking for the scholars. Now, I don't have anything against scholars. I mean, I'm a student of Greek. I like the scholars. I like Wallace. I'm not afraid of scholars, and by that I mean a lot of people just reject scholars. Ooh, the scholars, I don't need a scholar. Well, on certain things, yeah, we don't need scholars. I mean, we don't need scholars to make our decisions for us. But scholars, they're worth something. And I like them. So when I say I'm not afraid of them, like some people who I think are afraid of them and just criticize them because they're not scholars. We should never be like that. But anyway, it's Corey Minor who was asking for it. I don't have any enjoyment, in fact, emailing a whole bunch of scholars trying to get them to respond. I emailed at least a dozen. Only 4 responded. 1 agreed that Corey's inferences were false, and in a subsequent email said, and changed his mind basically, and said, no, I agree with it. Okay, so there's no doubt that there's scholars out there who will say the same thing that Corey does. We're going to get to that. 1 said, I don't have time to answer this question, and then I had one who just said, what you said sounds reasonable, but that wasn't enough. I know Corey, if he's going to dismiss these other scholars, he certainly would have dismissed that. And then the 2 that I brought. But no, Corey wants more. In fact, he just wants, he's always going to want more because he's not going to shut his channel down, and I had no expectation that he would. But if he would just concede and say, I shouldn't have made the challenge, and if he would just start preaching the right thing, I'll leave him alone about shutting his channel down. But he doesn't deserve to be left alone until then because he's the one that makes the challenge. He made the challenge 2 weeks ago. Okay, so here's a comment that he left in some of my response to some of my comments to him. But he says, find an actual scholar who uses Greek and explains how my Greek exegesis is wrong. Right. And in the discussion, I said, how do I know ahead of time that you're not just going to say, he's not a real scholar? Of course. He'll dismiss it one way or the other. Find an actual scholar who explains how my Greek exegesis is wrong. That's exactly what I did. The inference that you make is the most important thing. We're going to get to that. Now, you say, AK, you've been talking about it, but people aren't getting it. I know some people get it. In fact, I know a lot of people get it. But a lot of the other people don't get it. And I want to keep talking about this. And Corey certainly doesn't get it. You used only one scholar who agrees with me. Well, he agrees that the passage is about once saved, always saved, or favors it, which is not what you say. You say it's without a doubt. Without a doubt. He says it favors it. That's fine. I told you ahead of time that the guy already believes in once saved, always saved. But what he disagrees with is the inference that Corey makes, which is Corey's whole position is made or falls on that inference. He said, though he disagreed with your false representation of what I said. And your second is not a Greek scholar or grammarian. Of course, my second scholar that I provided, of course, did not agree with Corey in any such form. So Corey didn't have anything to grab a hold to, so he just dismissed that one. The first one I mentioned, well, he did agree with once saved, always saved, at least from that it favors it in John 10. So he's like, well, there's something. So now he'll count because he agrees with me, he thinks. But the second one, since he didn't agree with him at all, no, he don't count at all. That's the way that works. Okay, so he wants more. And then, of course, once he dismisses them, that's what he told me. He said, why don't you do this, that? Why? Waste my time? Why in the world would I waste my time further looking for more Greek scholars that say, yeah, that's wrong, and then for Corey to say, well, they don't count? I mean, if I have time, maybe I will. But it's not for his sake, it's for other people's sake. But that's the way this is working, you see. Now, let's see here. I want people to know what, in my discussion with Corey, in the section about John chapter 10, you've got to know what I was not doing, okay? I was not attempting to disprove once saved, always saved, or perseverance of the saints. People keep saying, I don't think you made your case that once saved, always saved is false from John 10. Wasn't trying to. What I was doing was called a rebuttal. A rebuttal is showing how the other person's argument is false. Not necessarily that your counter-argument, or rather my counter-position, is true. People got to know that. I was doing that with Galatians 5. One commenter said, well, I don't think you made the case that, once saved, always saved is false from John 10, but you did much better in Galatians 5. Well, that's because in Galatians 5, I was attempting to prove my case. It wasn't a rebuttal in Galatians 5. He was rebutting me in that point. Okay, also, in the discussion with John chapter 10, you have to understand that I was not attempting to prove from John 10 that sheep can stop being sheep. People keep saying in comments, you did not show, and it doesn't say anywhere in the text where sheep can stop being sheep. Of course not. Wasn't my job. Wasn't what I was doing. I didn't say the text shows sheep can stop being sheep. Now, I may have asserted that as my belief because, you have to make your belief known, but I wasn't attempting to prove that from the text. I was attempting to prove that if sheep become non-sheep, if they stop following, and what we're talking about is believers. If believers stop being believers, then they will perish because the emphatic negation applies only to believers. That's the point. Okay, but anyway, I was not debating the sheep issue from the context. People keep saying, we got to look at the larger context. Yeah, I'm dealing with the Greek argument. The Greek argument, particularly as it applies in verse 28 in clause B. That's what I wanted to focus on, because it's there that he stakes his claim more than anything. And I've shown clips of him doing that. I've provided you quotes. Now, here's what I was doing. I was demonstrating that Corey's Greek argument will not do the job. You have to realize those things. I want to look at some things. Now, he wants more scholars. I'll talk about Wallace, too, here a little bit, but let's look at this. I want you to see what he has said. Now, when the scholar that I provided, which he called a little scholar, by the way, because he was mad. Now he apologized, fair enough. But when he was attempting to dismiss them, he seized on one phrase, which was ume by itself. And he said, I've never said ume by itself. As if either that scholar or I have ever accused Corey of saying that the two words in and of themselves, without any other context or any other words around them, prove once saved, always saved. Of course, that has never been the issue. We're talking about the ume by itself in the clause. In other words, the Greek will not prove the case. You have to derive stuff from what is said otherwise. And when you are doing that, when you are going otherwise in the context and looking at what Jesus says, then you're no longer resting your case on the emphatic negation. You're resting it on the passage. You're resting it on the context. But that's not what Corey argues. He says the Greek itself. He's got a video of him saying, this says the sheep will never, ever perish. And then he starts repeating the word ever, probably 30 times or more. Ever, 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 ever. And he keeps going. He looks at his watch and he keeps going. That's what he stakes his case on. And it's that particular point that I'm trying to demonstrate to everybody who can't see through the fog that it doesn't work. You have to have other things. He's doing an injustice to the Greek. Here's what he said. I want everybody to see it. This is from a video called You Cannot Lose Your Salvation. It's from 5/7/22. He was talking to a guy named JP. At 51 minutes and 35 seconds, he says, my understanding, they've been talking about John 10, like most of the time. That's what he does. He does most of the talking in his videos, which I let him talk for a while in the beginning, and then I said, all right, that's it. You're not going to rule everything this way. So at 51 minutes, he said, my understanding is that this is Jesus saying that it is impossible for anyone, any of his sheep to perish, no matter what they do in the future. I can agree with that because that is what the rule says. This is where people don't understand me, because you have to listen. Don't just know that I'm disagreeing and try to dismiss everything I say. Listen. Corey Minor, if you ever watch this, listen. I keep getting comments, and I see comments that say, AK, you didn't prove, you show me that the Greek rule doesn't say it's impossible for the sheep to perish. And I'm thinking, you haven't heard a word I'm saying. Now, I get that happens. There's so much. When you think you know what a person's saying, you sometimes don't actually hear what they're saying. I get it. But you're not listening. I don't know how many times I had to say it. I agree that the sheep will never perish. I agree that it is impossible for them to perish. That is what the rule says. This Greek construction leads to that conclusion. There isn't any doubt about it. I've never disagreed with it. I don't disagree with it. I've said I agree with it. That's not the issue. So right up into there, he states it correctly. Now he starts making an inference that the rule itself does not say. This is the whole thing right here. This is the part that people are failing to grasp. There's the Greek, and you don't have to. And I get the fact that most people are not experts in Greek. Corey says he's not. I don't say that I am. I get most people don't even know the Greek at all. I get it, but you don't have to know the Greek to get what I'm saying. If you listen to Corey Minor, you don't have to know Greek to get what I'm saying. Okay. There is the Greek here, but over here is what I'm dealing with. See, Corey is taking the Greek rule, and as long as he words it correctly, I agree with him. The sheep will never perish. And it says ume with the aorist subjunctive, meaning the potentiality of them perishing in the future is not even possible. I agree. That's this Greek over here, okay? And I'm not trying to be condescending. I'm just trying to be visually helpful here. Over here is that Greek rule, which we all agree with. Corey says it, and I agree with it if he says it correctly. We agree with it. Daniel Wallace tells, I got the book. I've read the emphatic negation part many, many times. I get it, and I agree with it. So here's the Greek over here, which says the sheep will never perish, even in the future. I got it. But what Corey does is this, and this is the problem. Then he makes a logical inference. Now that's going to be represented over here. with, you can't see it because of my computer. On the other side, the logical inference, therefore the sheep cannot stop being sheep. That's an inference. That's not Greek. Does everybody get what I'm saying, even if you disagree? I just want you to understand what I'm saying. Here's the Greek rule that says the sheep will never perish, even in the future, and then an inference from logic is made, and I don't have a problem making inferences. But when you're making an unnecessary inference, what that means is you cannot necessitate this from that. It's like saying, I think maybe this classic example, if a husband tells his wife, "You look beautiful today," and she says, "So what you're implying is I don't look beautiful other days." That kind of thing. Okay. You see, she's making an inference from what you're saying. And that could be what the person means. That could be what the husband means. It just depends on whether he does or not. But he hadn't said that. Does everybody get that? He hasn't actually said that. We're talking about whether that statement that he made implies that or not. And it does not necessarily imply it. It's ambiguous. I mean, you can't know that from that statement. He could mean that. He could mean, yeah, she don't look good other days. But you can't know from that statement because the statement could just simply means what it means and nothing else. So when the hypothetical wife here infers from that she doesn't look good to him other days, that's what you call an unnecessary inference. So, and it is not justified, actually. It is not justified merely by that statement. Because that statement does not what we call necessarily imply it. There are some things that are implied necessarily. If I say my friend Bob got decapitated yesterday, I am necessarily implying he's dead. Okay, that's a necessary implication. You can't be decapitated and not be dead, unless the resurrection has happened. But I think people know what I mean, right? There's a difference between a necessary implication and an unwarranted implication or inference. So, if you look here, he states the Greek rule correctly, for the most part. But then he makes an inference. And the Greek rule doesn't say this. Jesus doesn't say this. But he's making an inference. And what I'm telling you is, this is the problem. You cannot make this inference. And this is the inference. Now, what that must mean is that they, the sheep, are never going to stop walking with him. That is not what that must mean. When Corey says must, he means necessarily. This is a logical conclusion. And it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Now, if you had some other statement that said that somewhere else, you could say, well, because of that statement, I get this. But remember, he's talking about the emphatic negation. He's making an inference that does not work. Now, my argument here, now I want everybody to listen. My argument, and basically everything I'm saying in this point in this discussion I had with Corey about John chapter 10 is just what I just said. I'm trying to show him he's making an unnecessary inference. Inference is a word that we use to refer to when you logically conclude something from another. I just gave you some examples. Saying the sheep will never perish does not necessarily tell you that they will always be sheep. That is information that has to be determined from other things. Now, if someone wants to say, well, everything Jesus says about the sheep throughout John chapter 10 proves it. Well, I will disagree with you, but that's a different argument. When Corey says, my Greek exegesis, the emphatic negation, and down here, when he says the rule, talking about the Greek rule, states you cannot later on walk away, this is not an argument about what else the context says. This is an argument about the Greek rule in this clause demands this conclusion. That's what he says. The rule stay. You can't see it, I guess, here. Let me move it out of the way. or out of the way from behind me. So what he says. He says, the rule states you cannot later on walk away. See, I'm trying to deal with that. And it is, a lot of people don't know how these things work. Burden of proof, a rebuttal versus a positive argument, that you're making. But you have to know that's what I'm doing. So when Corey says this, and he says up here, what that must mean is that they're not ever going to stop walking away, he's making an inference. And now what I'm saying is, the Greek is one thing, but you are inferring something that you can't. This is you've now entered into the realm of debate where we're talking about whether the logic is faulty or not. Not grammar anymore, but logic. See, the grammar, we could say the grammar says this all day long. And I get we got to make inferences. But your inferences are just a matter of logic. And the rules of logic apply to him, and apply to Wallace, it applies to anybody else. To say the sheep will never, ever perish in the future does not say they will always be sheep. The sheep could stop being sheep, in which case the statement doesn't apply to them anymore. Now, can sheep stop being sheep? Or in this case, they would stop being Jesus' sheep. This is not sheep versus goats, by the way. That's a different parable. This is Jesus' sheep versus somebody else's sheep. But it's the same issue. Okay, it says they will walk with him and all that. Different discussion. You've left Greek argumentation now, and now you're entering into regular context argument. I was never dealing with Corey with the whole context. I was dealing with him on the Greek rule because that's where he hangs his hat. He says he doesn't for some reason, but he does. Okay, this is what he says. Listen. They're not ever going to turn away. They're never going to stop believing. That's what's implicit in what he just said. There's the word implicit. Does everybody know what I'm saying? Implicit is the same word to imply. And a thing will imply something, and then another person infers. Infer and imply go together. This is how that works. If a statement that somebody makes implies something, then the person who's hearing him will infer it. That's the way that works. If I imply that somebody's dead, you're inferring that they're dead from my statement. I'm implying, you're inferring, or vice versa. So when Corey says that's implicit, what he's saying is, okay, that statement is implying something, I am inferring. That's the way it works. These terms go together. So when I keep talking about he's making an inference, he concedes. Corey Minor concedes right here that he's making an inference when he uses the word implicit. And I'm saying that because a lot of people are not familiar with how this works. It's grammatical, it's logical. But somebody implies one thing, but a person hearing it will infer it. That's the way it works. So when he says that's what's implicit, he means that's what I am inferring from his statement. And when he says up here, that's what this must mean, what he means is Corey thinks it necessarily implies it. And so what he's saying is I'm necessarily inferring it. And then he says, is my Greek understanding of that passage correct? He's resting his case on a Greek thing. But what I'm saying is, so long as you state the rule correctly and you don't falsely infer something, you're okay, but that's what he does. All of this is the inference that he makes. In 52 minutes, he says, Jesus just said of the sheep, they shall never perish, no matter what happens. Now, when did Jesus ever say that? No matter what happens. This is stuff Corey's implying. But here's the thing. I don't have a problem with that, because the sheep will never perish, no matter what happens, as long as they're sheep, because that's what we're talking about. But whether or not sheep stop being sheep is different. If someone says, well, if that's something, you just said no matter what happens. No matter what happens to the sheep, which logically excludes them not being sheep. See, it does come down on a large part to what we mean by our words. Now, but obviously that Corey means, no matter what happens, he means they can't even stop being sheep. Well, then that wouldn't be something that happens, would it? But if it applies only to them. Now, my Hobby Lobby example works. If Hobby Lobby says our employees will never, ever work Sundays, what they are not implying, this is what we're talking about, implication and inference. What they are not implying, and everybody knows, is that their employees will always be their employees. And if somebody infers that, you have made an unnecessary inference. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about something about their employees. But if somebody quits in the future, then the policy doesn't even apply to them anymore. And this is exactly what we got in the Bible. I gave these examples, and he didn't get around them. He tried to, of course. But if you're going to be consistent, you have to say these things. Okay, let's do this. Get my Bible over here. Okay. John chapter 3, verse 36. The same principle of logic will apply. Now, this doesn't have the emphatic negation, but as Mounts will tell you, as Wallace, the difference is emphasis, it really doesn't matter. Jesus is, because we wouldn't say Jesus is wrong, right? Even if he doesn't use the emphatic negation, he just uses a normal negation. But he says, he who does not obey the Son, if you're a King James onlyist, just substitute the word believe, and that's fine, because the same word could be, translated both ways. He who does not, let's just use believe, that's what I try to do to appease everybody. He who does not believe the Son will not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him. So, the unbeliever will not see life. Same thing. If my sheep will never perish means they will always be sheep, otherwise they would perish, then the unbeliever will not see life, will always be an unbeliever, otherwise he will see life. You see how that works? The logic works the same. Now, the inference has to be consistent. Has to be. So we can say it like that. In fact, let's just go to this chart, because I asked, now everybody go back and listen to how which one is this going to be? I read this. Now, I didn't have the chart up. He didn't even know I had this chart. And I was reading this almost verbatim. I was looking on my screen reading it, getting him to concede, and he did, that this was his reasoning. I said, okay, so Corey, if Jesus' sheep will never perish, then what that means to you, so what you're saying, that's the way I worded it to Corey. I said, so what you're saying, I want to make sure I understand you, that if Jesus' sheep stop being his sheep in the future, then they will perish. Therefore, it would not be true that his sheep will never perish. Is that what you're saying? And I think I did it twice. And he said, yeah, that's pretty much it. Well, the same applies to the other statements. He who does not believe the Son will not see life. So let's apply the same reasoning. If unbelievers stop being unbelievers in the future, then they will see life. Therefore, it is not true that unbelievers will not see life. How did the unbeliever, I asked him this too, and it tripped him up a bit. And he didn't ever really answer it. How did unbelievers end up seeing life? Let's see, if an unbeliever stops disbelieving, I think we all know what it means. It means he will see life. So how was it that the unbeliever saw life? Jesus said the unbelievers will not see life. And yet everybody concedes that here's a case where an unbeliever ended up seeing life. It's simple, because the unbeliever stopped being that category of person. He switched categories. He switched from being an unbeliever to a believer, in which case that statement no longer applied to him. Oh, but AK, you didn't show that the sheep could stop being sheep in John chapter 10. I wasn't trying to. I wasn't trying to prove that you could stop being sheep in John 10. I was trying to prove that the inference that he's making doesn't establish that the sheep will always be sheep. You need other information. Oh, but AK, the rest of the context talks about the sheep. Yes, but he's making a grammatical argument in clause B. That's what I was dealing with, not the overall context. Because once you start appealing to the overall context or something else, you've left the Greek argument. Same thing. Jesus said in Mark 10:15, "He who does not receive the kingdom like a child will never enter it." So that would imply that there will always be people who do not receive the kingdom like children. Same words. If they receive it like a child in the future, then they will enter the kingdom. Therefore, it is not true that those who do not receive the kingdom like a child will never enter it. So in this case, you have those who did not receive the kingdom like a child, and they ended up entering the kingdom. How did they do that when Jesus said they wouldn't? It's because they stopped being those kinds of people. It's really simple to me. It's kind of amazing. Let's keep looking at Corey's statements, though. Jesus said, and this is 52 minutes, Jesus said of the sheep, "They shall never perish no matter what happens." That means inference. This is called inference now. You've left what the Greek rule actually states. You've left what the English states. See, here's the truth of it. I'm trying to deal with Corey on his grounds, which is Greek, because I'm comfortable in the Greek. But really all this doesn't mean that much. You could leave the Greek out, and he could still make the same argument as English. In fact, he does. He often says, well, just look at the English. The English is... Exactly. We could just leave the Greek out, make the same arguments for and against what we're talking about with the English. But he's the one that keeps pushing and hammering the rule, the rule, the rule. The rule does nothing for him. It most certainly doesn't do anything that the English doesn't do, except you lose some emphasis in the English. He says that means that you cannot come back and say, if they stop following. You see, he made an inference. If they stop this, if they stop that. All right, so let's apply Corey's reasoning to this. No, that's not the one I want. Okay. Jesus said, "He who does not believe the Son will not see life." What that must mean is that you cannot come back and say, according to Corey, if they become believers, if they do this, if they do that. No. Doesn't work, you see. Let's split it. But I don't even think I ever got this chart. Where'd it go? Now, I just saw it. Here we go. I never got to this one. I put his quote up there. It says, now what that must mean is that they're not ever going to stop walking with him, that they're not going to turn away. Never stop believing. That's what's implicit in what he just said. So let's look at the reasoning here and see if it becomes consistent. I have to remember that these things are behind me. Here we go. So, I'm looking over here, but this thing is over here. Okay, here's what the statement is, my sheep will never, perish. For Corey Minor, this implies they will never stop being sheep. Be consistent. So when Jesus says, whoever does not receive the kingdom like little children will never, enter it, well, then that implies they will never receive the kingdom like a child. So once you reject the kingdom, always reject the kingdom. And it's the same thing with this statement. When Jesus says, he who does not believe the Son will not see life, implies, according to Corey Minor, he will never stop disbelieving. It doesn't work. All of that just refuted. I keep getting these comments. Why don't you refute this? I have, just did it. It's very easy to see that I refuted it. Now, what am I refuting? Am I refuting once saved, always saved completely? No, I've already told you that this particular argument is not about disproving once saved, always saved. It's about disproving that it can be established by that emphatic negation in John chapter 10, verse 28. This is a rebuttal. Let's see here. Here we go. Moreover, at 57 minutes, Corey says if you can give it, referring to eternal life, back, then that means clause B is wrong. You notice? You notice Corey in the debate in his follow-up video, he said, "When did I ever say ume by itself?" What do you think we're talking about? I don't mean the two words in a vacuum, like just words ume, wherever you see them, just on a blank sheet of paper, there's once saved, always saved. He knows that I'm talking about, and anyway, it was the scholar's words, but he's responding to what I was talking about. I was talking about ume as it's found in that particular statement, my sheep will never perish. And I was talking about the inference that is made. So when that scholar said ume by itself, he didn't mean ume as two words found on a blank sheet of paper. He meant ume in clause B, which, because Corey says here, if you can give eternal life back, then that means clause B is wrong. What is clause B? The statement Jesus, or my sheep will never perish. That's the point. If you can give it back, then Jesus lied. He's wrong when he says they will never ever perish. That includes if you decide that you want to give it back, meaning you will never give it back. At 58 minutes, he says the emphatic negation in the Greek negates anything that you can come up with. Okay. This is a very important part. And I'm going to either clip this out as a short or make another one that's no more than a minute. Corey Minor keeps saying, when did I ever say ume by itself? Right there. I mean, if you want something like that, there it is right there. The emphatic negation of the Greek negates anything. That means by itself. The emphatic negation of the Greek negates anything that you can come up with. That's the whole point of the emphatic negation in Greek. There it is, Corey Minor. Once again, challenge accepted and challenge successfully won. So there it is. The emphatic negation in the Greek negates anything that you... Now, I want everybody to know, because his own people are not hearing what I'm saying. He is resting his whole case on the emphatic negation, as it is found in clause B. And I never said that he was saying ume as two words by themselves on a blank sheet of paper. I meant as they are found in the statement, my sheep will never perish. But even having said that, it's almost that he's saying emphatic negation by itself. But right here, he's still talking about in the statement. But there it is. The emphatic negation Greek negates anything that you can come up with. But then he has the audacity to say, where's the scholar? Well, wouldn't the scholar have anything? Wouldn't something a scholar says be something? But the Greek emphatic negation negates anything, he says. This is a misuse. Corey Minor misuses Greek. Most people don't know the level that he knows. I do. And I'm here to tell you, he misuses it. You should not listen to him. Well, you can listen to him, but you know what I mean. Don't trust him. 58 minutes and 48 seconds, Corey says the rule states you cannot later on walk away. That's not what the Greek rule says. Here's what the Greek rule states. Even in its context, it says the sheep will never perish. That's it. But whether the sheep will ever be sheep is an inference that cannot be justified from the statement. Just like Mark chapter 10, verse 15, just like my Hobby Lobby example, which works, and just like John chapter 3, verse 36. In the last short video I did, I talked about this. Bill Mounts basically says the same thing I'm saying here. Okay, one more thing. How late are we going? We got 40 minutes. I want to listen to what Wallace says. Oh, let's see here. I'm going to pull up Wallace. Give me 1 second. Wallace. Now this is... Okay. Bring it back. This is his little video on Wallace, which I've already seen. So let's take a look at it. People want to say, refute Wallace. I don't disagree with the rule as stated by Wallace. Let's listen.
This is specifically ume plus...
This is Daniel Wallace talking, and Daniel Wallace is the one who does this grammar, which is how I learned Greek right here.
Aorist subjunctive. I want you to notice a couple things. It's the aorist subjunctive, and it's ou may. It's not may ou. Now, may ou is a double negative that really is negating the negative. Ou may is not really quite the same thing as a double negative. What it's doing is it's a strong negative on the possible negative. The ou is normally used with indicatives, but it's used with may, which normally goes with the oblique moods. And the may is saying, this is not likely. And then ou is saying, this is not even possible, not even likely. It's a strengthened negative of the may. This is, in fact, the strongest way to negate a point in Greek. While ou negates a certainty, ou may negates even the possibility, in other words. So here's a great illustration.
And everything he said, I agree 100%.
John 10:28, and another one in Romans 4:8. John 10:28, when you have the Good Shepherd narrative, the Lord says, I give them eternal life, and they will not at all perish. Ou may apollontai. What's interesting about the emphatic negation is that the speaker or writer who uses it by far the most in the New Testament is actually Jesus. It's more on the lips of Jesus than anyone else in the New Testament. And what's also significant is the way he uses it routinely and mostly is to speak about salvation and how someone who is saved cannot get lost. Here's a great place where he says,
now, there's the statement. And the statement could be somewhat ambiguous, but I know he's a Calvinist, and I know what he would mean by that. To say that someone who is saved cannot get lost, that's an inference. It doesn't mean someone who is saved can't get lost. It means when Jesus uses the phrase, he uses it of believers, he uses it of sheep. So here's what you got to understand. There's the Greek rule. Now, Jesus never says the saved will never be lost. He says believers will never die. They will never perish. My sheep will never perish. Those are the statements. To say that the saved cannot get lost communicates a different idea. Now, everybody has to understand, you cannot be so biased as to know that that is not an interpretation of data, because Jesus doesn't actually use ou may in that way. He doesn't actually say, those who are saved will ou may be lost. That's not such a statement. Dan Wallace is is drawing a conclusion from how he understands things. Now, see, people would recognize that other Greek scholars who come to conclusions that they disagree with understand how that might work, of course. Daniel Wallace is making the same inference in that statement that Corey Minor makes. Of course, lots of people do. Lots of people, on other issues, make unnecessary inferences quite all the time. When the Mormons read the statements in 1 Corinthians 15 about what shall they do who are baptized for the dead, they infer that this is some practice that all Christians, that this is a proxy baptism that people practice in the church. That's an unnecessary inference. Now, depending on the meaning of Paul's words, it could mean that. It doesn't, because other things in the Bible don't allow it. But just the statement itself could mean that, but it doesn't necessitate it. They're making an unnecessary inference. It's the way that it works. But people, if they believe in once saved already, and they see Daniel Wallace making that statement, they say, well, who are you compared to Dan Wallace? Listen, I don't compare my Greek to Dan Wallace. I already understand the Greek. I learned the Greek from him. I know what the rule says. It says what he's already said, that the emphatic negation with an aorist subjunctive is the strongest way to negate something, and it negates, if I can get my words right here, it negates even the potentiality of the future possibility. That's what it does. I already agree with that. But Dan Wallace sees all this, and he reads once saved, always saved, and he thinks that's the conclusion, but it's just another inference. I'm never going to convince people that don't want to be convinced. I would more than happily sit down with Dan Wallace on a live program and say, all right, Dan Wallace, you're the master of Greek. Now I'm going to challenge your inference. And I would do it to him exactly. And by the way, I've already got somebody who's saying the same thing, and it's mounts. Go read this article from billmounts.com called When Does No Become Never? You just have to search for it. Monday, December 3rd, 2018. I've already read it, so I hate to keep repeating myself. But Dan Wallace didn't say anything about the Greek that I already agree with until he came to a conclusion. It's never going to be enough for Corey. In fact, I saw a video of Corey talking about the emphatic negation, and he was just going on and on. He said, no Greek scholar is ever going to get around that. You know what that means? Now, if you're a friend of Corey Minor, I want to talk to you. You can still be his friend. You can still disagree with me, okay? But I want to make a point. I don't want you to be honest. When the same man who constantly asks for scholars and says, show me one scholar, but then you know he's already said no scholar can get around that, do you not realize that he never intends to accept the scholarship that would counteract what he says? Because he's already decided scholars can't. They can't get around it. So if you're going to be honest, you have to know that Corey Minor is not ever going to permit himself to concede to any scholar that you would show him. He will always, unless he changes his mind, which he could, but I got no evidence that he will based upon what he has said. That is a fact. So we're going to do a live program sooner or later. I got plenty of things to say about this discussion. But Corey Minor misuses the Greek. He does it unfairly. He doesn't like to listen when you try to correct him. When you show him things that he asks for, he just dismisses it. That doesn't make him a trustworthy exegete of the Bible or expositor. And so you should, nice guy, but you should beware.